What's up guys, Crazy here, back into Borderlands, and today we're going to take a look at shotguns. There's a bunch of shotguns in the game that are actually extremely overpowered and a few of them that are not so great. So today we're going to try to rank about 15 or 20 of these. These are all of the shotguns that I currently have in the game. These are some of the most popular ones that people use, and of course some of them are the best in the end game. So you know what, we're going to jump right in, and also some spoilers alert because there's going to be some end game fights that I'm going to be posting here, as well as a bunch of end game stuff that I'm going to talk about in this video. But for all of those who do want to see what are the best shotguns currently in the game, well, let's dive right in with everything we've got. I'm going to start things off with the Hyperion shotguns because, well, these are the ones that appear first in my list, and I kind of want to start with a few over here that I found to be extremely powerful, especially these two. Hyperion shotguns are generally interesting, but there's only a couple of them that I would consider downright overpowered, and I'm actually going to start things off with the Butcher because I believe that this is probably the strongest Hyperion shotgun. Now the bonuses over here, as you can see, they are pretty ridiculous. The damage is really high, like 1600, but the fire rate and the magazine size is what makes this shotgun so great. In fact, out of all of the weapons that I've tested in the game so far, the Butcher is one of the highest rate of fire weapons currently in the game, and this works perfectly well with Flak. It synergizes so well with one of its builds to the point that I'm using this to reset the timer of my fadeaway ability extremely fast because I'm pulling in so many crits very fast. Now I did go ahead and test this both against enemies and bosses, and it behaves extremely well in both of the scenarios. Maybe the only downside that I can think of is the fact that since you have a limited amount of bullets for shotguns, well, you can quickly run out of ammo if you're going into long fights. So this is more suited in, let's just say, shorter fights or against boss enemies that you don't get to stay too long into. The next one that I'm going to cover is another excellent choice. This is the Conference Call, and this one drops from Katagawa Jr. in the Atlas HQ. So you can go in and farm it from him, but Loot Things can also drop this exact same weapon, so there's multiple sources you can get this from. Now this is slightly weaker than the previous one. Even though the damage is kinda on par with it, its functionality is what is holding it back a little bit. So the way this works is that this has amazing spread damage, so when you're shooting an enemy, the bullets actually get reflected in a nice line around the enemy. So what this means is that you can take down multiple enemies at the same time. But nonetheless, this is a rather good weapon. It's not as good as I was expecting, and that is because it doesn't come with some really high base damage. The accuracy is pretty poor. It has a rather decent handling, but I found this one to have a little bit more recoil than I actually wanted it to have. The reload time is actually better than the previous one, but the fire rate is nowhere near close to the Butcher. So this is where this weapon starts to fall off compared to the Butcher in the Hyperion category. The next one is the Brainstormer. This is weaker than the previous two, so this is how we're going to go into. The Brainstormer actually has a very interesting effect, as in this case it comes with lightning damage, but when you're shooting enemies and they're close to one another, it chains between them, and you can chain it between at least 2 enemies. I've seen it chaining between 3, even 4 at the same time. So it's again a very nice AoE damage dealer, but the damage per bullet is actually kinda low. It's even lower than the Conference Call, and the rate of fire is lower even than that. So the overall DPS on this thing is a little bit lower. This is more suited against, for example, enemies with shields, but against bosses it severely drops off. It's not really that great. You can quickly run out of magazine size and not even tap into half of the boss's HP. And the final Hyperion gun I'm going to cover is the Face Puncher, by far the weakest I've tested so far. It's all around not great in any area. It comes with some really low damage. Yeah, the fire rate is very low, the magazine size is even lower comparable to some pistols, and its only gimmick over here is the fact that when you get damage in the shield that it has, it gives you some ammo in return, and I believe that every like 2 or 3 shots from one single enemy gives you 1 bullet, but honestly it's just not worth it simply because the damage is so low. You will quickly burn through all of your ammo and you're still not going to clear any waves of enemies. Now the next ones that I'm going to cover are of course the Jacobs, and as a matter of fact, Jacobs over here have so many amazing examples to go over. It seems that this manufacturer has multiple gun types that excel in multiple areas. class. I'm going to start things off with my favorite one. This is the Hellwalker, the Doom reference, and I think that I'm going to place this one on the first place, even though a lot of people might prefer the one Pump Chump. But if you were to take on pure damage alone, the Hellwalker obviously has a lot more damage. So in this case, it's 5,330 compared to only 4,000 from the one Pump. But both of these actually excel in different areas, and it's really hard to like put one over the other. I would probably put these both on the first spot because both fit different scenarios and both are really adaptable. But you know, I just went with the Hellwalker first because I find this so much more badass. So in this case, it comes with some really nice damage. Its damage is a spread type, so the further you are away from the enemy, the more pellets you are going to miss, but the closer you are, the more interesting it gets. So you can empty your magazine each second and continuously shoot, but the beauty about this is that if you're playing with the proper flag build, and let's say for example you have this skill over here, the Leave No Trace, that returns bullets into your magazine when you're doing critical hits, you can actually spam this, and this is where the huge amount of damage comes from. And yeah, just the way it works, the damage and the way it handles makes it so overpowered against bosses and also extremely well against enemy fights. But if you don't have that, or if you're playing from further away, I can see this weapon dropping off a little bit. I mean, it is a shotgun and it is going to perform not that great from greater distances. But here is where the one pump comes into play, and the way this works is that it shoots more concentrated bullets, so the spread isn't really that big, which means that you're going to have a really high accuracy. I mean, even here, as you can see, it's 88% compared to like only 51 or 53%. The reload time isn't much longer compared to the Hellwalker, but the fire rate is definitely lower, only 1.6 per second, with a magazine size of only 1. But check this out, 50% chance not to consume ammo when fired. This bonus over here compared to Flak's passive skill Leave No Trace makes it an excellent combination, because you're going to be able to actually spam this even more compared to the Hellwalker, simply because you have two additional bonuses that kinda do the same thing. In this case, one of the bonuses provides you a chance to not consume any ammo when fired, while the other one just replenishes your ammo when you do a critical hit. And it's an all-around amazing weapon, especially against groups of enemies, and especially when you're aiming and hitting those headshots. But yeah, otherwise these two are just trading blows because they are so good against pretty much everything in the game. Now the next one I'm going to cover is the Nimble Jack. You get this from Handsome Jackie, which is one of the legendary hunts you get on Promethea. In this case it's a 442 times 9, so pretty close to 4000, but obviously it comes behind the previous two, so I can only place this on the third spot in terms of Jacob's shotguns. The accuracy and the handling here is pretty poor, but the way you work this is that you will have to constantly jump in order to reduce that reticle. So the more you jump, the more you're airborne, the more it improves your accuracy, to the point that this is going to be the most accurate weapon you're going to be able to shoot in the game. You just have to be airborne when you do this. And it deals a ton of damage on its own. It's 1 bullet per second, so it's pretty similar to the previous one, to the one pump, except the fire rate is slightly lower than that. Of course, it's weaker than that. It also comes with critical hits, ricochet 1 bullet to the nearest enemy, so you can actually take multiple enemies at the same time. Now the next one is the Garcia. This is another shotgun, a more automatic shotgun, because you can actually shoot this for much longer. So this comes with the biggest magazine size of 20, a really high fire rate, but the damage per bullet is of course the lowest of the shotguns I've tested so far and showed you in this video. Now this one drops from Chunk Stomp, located in Floodmore Basin on Eden 6, but it looks very unique. It is still a decent weapon, it's just that the fact that it has lower damage per bullet makes it really easy to like fully empty your ammo with this thing and still not finish the boss or the full group of enemy. Compared to the other options over here, it definitely falls off. Now the next manufacturer is of course the Malley one, and unfortunately the Malley one doesn't really have that many great shotguns, though it does have some really unique working ones. A better option I would say would be the Trevenator. This doesn't require any charging, or at the very least the model that I have doesn't require require any charging, you can just shoot it. But the overall damage on this thing is actually pretty reliable. I would say that this is a rather good weapon because you're shooting a full barrage of 9 bullets at the same time, which in this case deal like 418 times 3, so that's quite a hefty amount of damage and quite fast, I might say. At least against groups of enemies this is a good or decent weapon, but against bosses it can definitely fall off because yeah, just physical bullets generally speaking are better than this. Moving on, we have some TDR shotguns. There's a bunch of TDR shotguns in the game that you can get, and a lot of them are actually quite interesting. I would definitely place these as, you know, on the higher end because they are really interesting. So even though the damage over here per bullet is lower, for some reason it deals more damage than other weapons that might list higher damage numbers. In this case, I'm going to go over the Polybius, I think that's how you pronounce this, and this actually drops from either of the twins. So yeah, in my case, Troy Calypso is the one who dropped it. Now the way this works is that it shoots bullets like this, a few of them horizontally, a few vertically, and it alternates between them. And it shoots quite a few of these at the same time, which is why I believe makes up for that damage. But as any TDR weapon in the game, you can also shoot it and either have it explode on impact or make it become, well, in this case, a turret. And with these turrets, the funny part is that they start walking and they start chasing enemies. They can attack them, you can have at least 2 or 3 at the same time, so you can do more damage simply because yeah, it also has a mind on its own. Now the final one that I'm going to cover is the Torg category. There's a bunch of Torg weapons over here that are actually really OP, and if you know this, well, the previous patch has nerfed Torg shotguns in general, especially the ones that would leave sticky bombs into the enemy. But even so, there's a bunch of options over here that can still work even post-nerf, and a few of them aren't necessarily legendary, and the two ones that I'm going to talk about are of course the Kielbasa and the Bong Stick. These are in fact random drops, but I come across these quite often. You can get these from loot tanks, but also from Graveward. I found him to drop these quite a bit. Now I can confirm that this works with rather great success after the nerf itself as well. I've tested this against, for example, Captain Trount, and even though it's severely nerfed, it still deals a ton of damage from those explosions. An alternative to this would be the Bong Stick, and this is something that I'm pretty sure many of you are familiar with, and this has a slightly bigger ammo capacity, so you can shoot it like 4 times before it depletes, and again the bullets explode on impact, but you can also switch to sticky mode and stick even more into the enemy. Now the Cocky Flacker is the next one I'm going to cover, and it's also like the top damage dealer currently in this category at the very least. And it works just like how you expect. It explodes not on impact, but rather after a short to medium distance. So I actually qualify this as being quite overpowered because it just comes with a huge amount of damage. Most of it comes from the splash damage. The huge splash damage bonus over here is absolutely crazy. This is the type of weapon that can quickly clear up an entire room of enemies. It can definitely go very well against bosses, but its biggest downside is the fact that it is a very low range. And also the explosions are quite random, so what this means is that if you're fighting against bosses like Graveward, for example, who is very far away from you, you're not going to be very efficient against it at all. Against anything else in the game, this is a top tier damage dealer, so very good one. It just deals a ton of damage and there's nothing else I could say about it. Another one very interesting and very similar to the other one is the Boring Gun, and there's nothing boring about this weapon. The boring part comes to the fact that it's actually digging into the skulls of your enemies, but it is very powerful. It shoots these saws on the ground, but they deal tremendous amounts of damage, like 3000 flat out. It's just that, well, the downside over here is the fact that even if you aim high, you're not going to shoot these any further away. They are just going to travel on the ground. This is something that you're dealing as a ground damage. It also doesn't seem to crit, but you don't actually need crits with something that deals so much damage per one of these saws. The same goes against bosses that are not airborne, so anything that is on the ground, that is on the surface level and gets to meet one of these saws is going to get shredded into pieces by the huge amount of damage. And yeah, the only one that is left is the Lab. This is the last TDR that I have in my arsenal. Overall, this is a very bad weapon, not even mediocre. I mean, this is like bottom of the barrel because it has a very slow traveling bullet, even though it looks extremely extremely cool, it is very inefficient. Now, if I were to make a top 3 of the best weapons or the weapons that I would choose in this category, I would definitely go with the Butcher as the first one, mainly because it is so reliable, so I can use it from close to far range. It has a shield, it has a huge rate of fire, and it quickly regenerates my fadeaway, followed very closely by the Hellwalker and the One Pump. Both of these work perfectly fine, it just depends on the scenario. The third one is the Flacker. This is a huge damage dealer, but because it's rather unreliable and because it has some issues, yeah, it can definitely fall off quite a bit. And with this, I believe we have covered all of the shotguns. There's a few more in the game that I simply couldn't get because they just didn't drop, but otherwise these are the top 3 that I find myself using constantly in most of my builds. Now, if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would be super appreciated. Let me know down below if there's any other weapons in the shotguns category that you really found enjoyable. In the meantime, a thumbs up on this video would be super appreciated, and I will see you guys in the next one.